When I'm deciding on what alien from Ben 10 I want to make a video about, I tend to go with either aliens that are among the most popular, or aliens that were severely underutilized and often overlooked by the fans. But at some point I thought to myself, what about the middle ground? Aliens that have some neat stuff to talk about, but never reach the status of being among the most popular. There's a handful of aliens this applies to, but for this video I want to start with two members of the original 10 that fit the description best. Wildmutt and Stinkfly. While they both have their fair share of fans, and may even be some people's favorite, oftentimes these aliens are slandered for being underwhelming, or at best be considered mid when comparing them to the rest of the Omnitrix roster. Now one might argue that because they're members of the original 10, they're iconic automatically, but once you compare them to other members of the original 10 or other additional aliens, these two fade out of discussion as one of the potential most favored aliens in the series. It should be stressed that while this video does cover both Wildmutt and Stinkfly, two very different aliens, they do have some very similar reasons that brought them to the same general consensus. For this video, I want to talk about everything there is to Wildmutt and Stinkfly, why they're often regarded as mid, and see if anything could have been done to help improve their reputation in the fandom. Before we get started proper, I want to give a quick shout out to Useless Cicada, who was the first to guess correctly for one of the hints on my community tab. They guessed correctly for Wildmutt, who was the answer to the Wolverine hint. I knew this hint was kind of easy given that it's an orange character associated with an animal and that their name starts with a W, but they got it in less than 10 minutes, like they absolutely bodied my shit, so job well done. Since Wildmutt was used first chronologically, I'll start with him in the same way that I normally start these type of videos, which is talking about his character design and his abilities. Wildmutt is a Vulpomancer from the planet Vulpin, whose first appearance is in the very first episode of Ben 10, and then there were 10. Wildmutt's design on paper is pretty simple, but he has a lot of small touches that help his design feel creative and distinct, with his orange fur and quadrupedal body type being major reasons towards that. The quills alongside his arms and head are great touches, and his head shape is very xenomorph-like, which is something I often think about ever since a close friend pointed it out to me. I love how the teeth are crooked and how each one's length is uneven minus the fangs, and I really dig the shoulder brace where the Omnitrix badge is placed. It's a random piece of clothing that's just plastered on him, but it never really gave that vibe, especially because it blends in with Wildmutt's design look and color-wise incredibly well. And how could I discuss Wildmutt's design without addressing the blind elephant in the room? Just the idea of an alien who lacks eyes and uses their senses to be aware of their surroundings is already such a cool idea, which like his head shape is very xenomorph-like now that I think about it. I find it impressive how expressive Wildmutt can be at times despite the lack of eyes, which are often the most expressive part of the face. Adding on to the xenomorph parallels, Wildmutt is incapable of speaking through words, another thing that makes him unique compared to the other aliens. Wildmutt communicates with growls and roars, kind of like a dog or other type of animals. And these sounds are supplied by D. Bradley Baker, which sounds really great. Assuming you're watching this just because, or doing a generational run of Ben 10 LARPing, you're probably wondering how Wildmutt can see, and the answer to that is his sense of smell. You would expect Wildmutt's nose to be on his face like a dog given his inspirations, but his nose, or at least what he uses to smell, are on the sides of his neck, and kind of looks like the gills of a fish. That may seem small to some, but it's such a cool aspect that already helps Wildmutt stand out to me from a design perspective. With his sense of smell, Wildmutt can basically see without the need of eyes, seeing things in a similar fashion to thermal vision. Thanks to this, he can traverse terrain with ease, especially since he has great athleticism and strength. He can also destroy things easily with his claws and teeth, and is pretty durable all things considered. Combining all these elements is a safe assumption that Wildmutt is pretty capable in a fight, and offers some pretty good scenes for his screen time. While this holds true, something about Wildmutt failed to capture people's admiration like other aliens did. So let's see why this is by talking about his screen time, starting with his very first appearance, and then there were 10. And then there were 10, Ben uses the Omnitrix a second time to see what other aliens he has, and becomes Wildmutt. The first thing we see is his transformation sequence, but I'm actually going to save my thoughts on it for later, as it will come into play for an issue I have with his overall presentation. Wildmutt's debut does a great job at showcasing how this alien works on a basic level. I love that time is taken to let it sink in that he has no eyes or the ability to speak with words, with Gwen's reaction essentially matching ours as first-time viewers. And the step-by-step showcase of Wildmutt's vision is always a delight to see. The sounds used for Wildmutt's vision is also really awesome. I know it's reminiscent of a sonar tracker, but for some reason I always think of a heartbeat when I hear these sounds. We also get a good use of athleticism as Wildmutt swings from tree to tree, and although his battle with one of the Vilgax drones is short, this shot is forever iconic. Wildmutt's debut kinda flies by, but with the little time given, it's clear that he can offer some fantastic scenes and use cases. So do we actually get that? Yes and no, but I'm getting ahead of myself. At the very least, his next appearance in Permanent Retirement is really great. One of my favorite parts being the vicious way that Wildmutt fights the Limax Grandpa Max. It's like watching a Cane Corso take on a newborn squirrel. Also, this is sort of unrelated to Ben 10, but I also love this scene because of K-On!, one of my favorite animes. So for context, I saw this meme on Twitter that had Ritsu as Wildmutt and Mio as the Limax Grandpa Max, and I had to do a double take. Like, this shit had me dying when I first saw it. Another thing I really love about this scene is how Gwen interacts with Wildmutt. This is really only a thing in Season 1, but I would have loved if Gwen actually learned how to understand Ben as Wildmutt in a few more scenes and work together. It would make for a really good showcase of the cousins' bond and teamwork, which granted is done well within other things of the show, but I felt it was still worth mentioning. There are some episodes that do a good job at showing off how brutal and blunt Wildmutt can be in a fight. One example being Last Laugh. Before Zombozo enters the picture, he mops the floor of the entire circus trio effortlessly. Another nice moment is Midnight Madness, as he's able to hold his own in combat and has quick reflexes. What I like especially, however, is how his acrobatics is more emphasized, which I can also say for the episode Framed. It's a very blink it and you miss moment, but I love how Wildmutt jumps from these cars and swings from a wire, kind of like those poles you swing from in a 3D Sonic game. I also find it impressive how Wildmutt was able to hook the rust bucket to the cable car with ease. In fact, all of the crazy maneuvers or intricate stuff that he pulls off is extra impressive due to his field of vision, which at times I feel gets overlooked. Remember how I said yes and no to the question if Wildmutt's future appearances have good utilization or not? Well, let's get into that. As I went through some of Wildmutt's appearances, you may have noticed that I only have one or two brief things to say for most of them, which is praise to be fair, but still very brief. That's because Wildmutt's screen time is mostly made up of either brief moments that are fine enough, or him receiving tons of L's. I praised episodes like Midnight Madness, Last Laugh, and Framed, but in all 3 episodes, he does end up getting his ass handed to him. Lucky Girl also has Wildmutt fumbling like crazy, but in this case it was to help spotlight Gwen's newfound power, so in that episode it's not too bad. The reason I bring this up is because often at times, an alien's reputation can be hindered due to a notable amount of L's. The most defining example in my opinion being Chromastone. Chromastone does cool things and has cool moments, but infamous scenes like being destroyed by Vilgax or being electrocuted despite being a conductor since his literal debut has people often refer to him as a fraud and the like. Now, Wildmutt isn't as slandered as Chromastone, but you can see where the comparison comes from. Another issue with Wildmutt is that a lot of his episodes are cameos of him doing nothing of real worth. Episodes such as Secrets, Under Wraps, and The Visitor being examples that come to mind. You have him roaring for a second, hoeing a field, and being chased by infatuated dogs. There's nothing wrong with small charming moments, or aliens having cameos, but if you have too much of those type of scenes, you essentially end up with aliens like Edel, who's not harmful by any means, but pretty much does jack shit. Now that isn't to say that these moments of L's or cameos don't lead to interesting stuff. In the episode Truth, while Wildmutt fails to stop some Vulpamancers, it's really awesome to see him interact with other members of his kind. And the drastic differences between a child and adult Vulpamancer is really interesting. As a kid, the lipless worm mouths always confused me, but I assume that's just how Vulpamancers aged. I believe it's either just that some Vulpamancers are born with these mouths, or they're mutated due to being in the null void, but I often forget which is which. Regardless, it is a really cool design. In the same episode, I like seeing Wildmutt swing from chain to chain like he's on some Christopher Belmont shit. In the episode Side Effects, we see what happens if a Vulpamancer catches a cold. Wildmutt's nostrils become clogged, rendering him blind. This leads to a charming moment of Gwen trying to lead Wildmutt to Clancy, which ends up with her almost suffering the same fate as Kazuo Okuji. In the episode Don't Drink the Water, we get to see a 4-year-old Wildmutt dubbed Wild Pup, which is not really that interesting, but I guess it's kind of neat that he shows up. Given the machine that he defeats, Upgrade or Frankenstrike would have made more sense, but the fact that 4-year-old Vulpamancer can take this machine down is something worth noting, even if the design isn't terribly interesting. The episode Ghost Freak Out doesn't do anything new power-wise for Wildmutt, but he's the perfect alien for a dream fake-out scene, as hearing him speak is a complete mindfuck.
It's okay. I'm here to help get you down!
It also makes me wonder, if Ben dreams about using his aliens, does that mean he can dream with the perspective of Wildmutt's vision due to being him for so long when he's awake? One appearance I have to talk about is Tough Luck, just for the fact that he's used to fuck with a performer. Oh shit, is that Simon Belmont? And I should mention Wildmutt being used by Ben 10,000. I'm not really a big fan of this design. I like the stripes, but the tail is kind of whatever to me, and the Omnitrix badge placement ruins the appeal of his lack of eyes. Before we get to the next segment that further discusses Wildmutt's flaws, I want to talk about 3 more appearances that he has in the classic series. The first of these 3 being Ben vs. the -10 Part 2. I talked about this scene back in my Blitzwolfer video where I think Blitzwolfer would have made a better pick here, and I still firmly believe that. Wildmutt does show off some strength, but it's nothing crazy, and the only reason I'm bringing this episode up is because this is his final proper appearance in the classic series, unless you count Secret of the Omnitrix, which gives us a really neat scene of Wildmutt tracking Gwyneth Tetrax's ship via smell. We didn't really get a ton of this type of utilization for Wildmutt for the time being, so it does help this scene feel a bit more unique. And finally, I have to talk about his appearance in Race Against Time. I regret not having this as my runner-up for favorite Wildmutt scene for my favorite moment of every Alien video, cause the fact he defeats Eon with a frozen Gwen like she's an item in Smash Brothers is fucking hilarious. Imagine if Wildmutt did this in the show with the PNG of Gwen from Tourist Trap. They even went the extra mile to show us what Wildmutt's vision looks like in real life, which kind of reminds me of how it looks in Omniverse. I also like seeing Wildmutt's appearance in the talent show at the end of the movie, which now that I think about it is kind of a reversal of the Tough Luck scene. Look-wise, I find Wildmutt ambitious, so I do respect it for that, but this is mostly a miss. Mainly for the way his quills pop out in a garish way and how his teeth look paper thin. Not to mention how jittery his mouth is in motion. They tried with what they had, so kudos to the attempt. Overall, Wildmutt in Classic is a mixed bag. Mixed bags can be fine, but often have people asking for more, which I'll talk about more in depth on later in the video. Thankfully, this isn't the end for Wildmutt, as this is where UAF and Omniverse come into play. As I go over the next iterations of Wildmutt, let's see if Wildmutt's shortcomings are improved upon. I think it's obvious that if it was, I wouldn't be making a video about Wildmutt being considered mid in the first place, so for the sake of the video, let's pretend it's not. Wildmutt's design in Ultimate Alien is pretty much the same as his classic counterpart, although without a shoulder brace, so the Omnitrix badge is placed on his chest, which isn't as cool in my opinion, but it's fine enough. Is what I would say if this look wasn't exclusive to the intro. In the show proper, this is what we get for Ultimate Alien Wildmutt. The orange lips has to be one of the worst ways to change a classic alien. What the hell were they thinking? I wouldn't be shocked if they used certain frames of Wildmutt as a reference, and they all happen to be ones with the orange lips in place, without bothering to double check. There's nothing analytical to really say, it's just unappealing to look at. Sadly, the downgrades don't stop there, as D. Bradley Baker supplies the sounds for Wildmutt's roars like before, but now they're unfiltered, leading them to sound fine on their own, but with the context of what came before, they sound kind of bad. You might as well have Wildmutt sound like this. Wildmutt also sort of appears smaller in some frames as well. I say some because other frames, and by that I mean The Purge, does make him more size accurate, but in other scenes he looks kind of tiny. Look at him in Classic and then most of UAF. The difference is brainstorm levels of bad. You can argue that characters like Gwen, for example, are older and taller in UAF, so Wildmutt will naturally look smaller, but not by this much. If his lips were black, the design would be fine, but UAF Wildmutt is an example of one small difference really ruining the design. Okay, maybe ruining is a bit of an exaggeration, but you guys get what I mean. So his design is lesser, but what about his actual screen time? Our first time seeing UAF Wildmutt would be with Classic Ben in a small cameo for the first episode of Ultimate Alien, being Fame. It goes by really quickly, but it helps show how Jimmy Jones was monitoring Ben's activities as early as the Classic days. We also get Classic Ben using Wildmutt in Forge of Creation. He takes a bite out of the Rust Bucket 3 before present Ben changes him back to human, with his design not being much better than Teen Wildmutt. And the shoulder brace is missing the white stripe that really helps complete Wildmutt's look. Although I actually don't mind it being all black as long as it was detailed better, but it's too simple to really look that good. The only thing really worth noting here is how he's back at all in the show physically. 16-year-old Ben's first use of Wildmutt is in Victor the Spoils, where he's unconscious for a second. Okay, a unique way to return a classic alien, I suppose, but as a kid, I genuinely thought this was Raph because I didn't expect Wildmutt to just show up randomly. And coincidentally, at the same time, I was cleaning my glasses, so I deadass thought that this was just like an orange blob, so I assumed, okay, well, that was Raph, I guess. But no, it was Wildmutt. Like, what an odd way to introduce him back into the show for present Ben. Wildmutt is also mentioned to be used off-screen in the episode It's Not Easy Being Gwen, where he tries to track down Dr. Animo.
He got away again. Ben's using Wildmutt to track him. He'll call when he finds him.
Man, they're really teasing us with Wildmutt. I hope this means when he's back and being used normally at a consistent rate, that it's worth the wait. Especially since it's almost 30 episodes in Ultimate Alien's runtime. Well, let's see if that's the case with his true first reappearance in Prisoner 775 is Missing. Wildmutt is used to track down the prisoner before he can kill Rosam's family. We get a look at Wildmutt's vision in UAF, which isn't as interesting as classics, but it is cool that we can see his footprints in his vision, I suppose. Wildmutt doesn't fight the prisoner for terribly long, but he does go Ultimate. Our first of sadly 2 additional Ultimates in Ultimate Alien. I tend to not talk about the Ultimates because I'm going to save my thoughts on them for a video I'm going to do way later down the road, but I'll just say for now that I love this moment and that I'm a genuine fan of Ultimate Wildmutt, except the fact that he can talk. Also, I didn't mention this in my last Ben 10 video where I did my favorite episode of every Ben 10 season, but a detail I forgot about this episode is the fact that when Ultimate Wildmutt defeats the prisoner, right? And he's like, he's like, kill me, do it, let me join my family. He braces for impact when Ben turns back into human. You only see it for a second, so I only noticed because I edit footage of Ben 10 all the time, but that's fucking crazy. That is so dark, I love that. With Ben using Wildmutt proper and having an Ultimate at his disposal, surely this means Wildmutt's gonna get a ton of screen time in the final season of Ultimate Alien, right? Well, in The Purge, he's used briefly to find any trace of Forever Knights. Inspector 13's kinda funny cause Kevin turns into Wildmutt and speaks like Scooper Dubert after crashing his car. And in Ultimate Enemy Part 2, he runs up a hill to go Ultimate, fights for 3 seconds, and then changes back to human. Oh no, I can't handle all of the Wildmutt scenes they're giving us, there's just so much. My biggest issue isn't even Wildmutt not doing anything super crazy. It's more so the fact that he doesn't really do much of anything at all, or have many episodes he's used in the first place. If they're gonna blue ball us an alien for over half the show, I'd want at least a couple of really cool moments that give that alien time to really shine. Which is especially baffling because when Forms returned, much earlier might I add, while he didn't have the most creative stuff going on, he was a series regular, with a ton of scenes throughout Ultimate Alien's lifespan, with those scenes being good enough overall. In fact, there's 2 classic series aliens in particular that makes Wildmutt's biggest flaw in terms of utilization incredibly apparent, but more on that later. Ultimate Alien is known for its broken promise, so the cards were heavily stacked against Wildmutt. So can Omniverse salvage him with a whopping 80 episodes of potential? Quality over quantity is always something I want to stress, but it's a safe assumption just looking at the appearance ratio. So let's discuss if Omniverse Wildmutt can gain back some momentum, starting with his redesign. Right off the bat, Omniverse Wildmutt's design is an upgrade automatically for ditching the orange lips. And at first glance, it seems like they're doing their best to replicate the classic design, with the only difference significant enough being the chin. The chin is something that a lot of aliens share as it's a trademark of the Derek J. Wyatt art style. I think some aliens make it work better than others, and the part of me really wants to say the same for Wildmutt, but in the show itself, there's some episodes that just make the chin look really bad, especially when his head is drawn so tiny. One of Omniverse Wildmutt's artworks attempts to replicate one of his most iconic classic frames, but the small-ass head makes him look like a Goomba from the Mario Brothers movie. The collar is something I like in terms of what they wanted to go for, but I think the collar doesn't hold a candle to the shoulder brace, which we do see for 11-year-old Wildmutt. The collar is still fine though, as it leans into the dog inspirations of Wildmutt's design. One thing that Omniverse loves to do is streamline a lot of the more uneven alien-esque feeling design aspects of some aliens, so I'm glad Wildmutt's teeth for the most part were left untouched. Speaking of mouths, Wildmutt sounds are once again supplied by D. Bradley Baker, sounding like classics as opposed to the unfiltered growls of Ultimate Alien. So it seems like things are picking back up for Wildmutt, but design is only half the alien. Omniverse has a decent track record of taking advantage of an alien's abilities for some really awesome scenes, like Brainstorm's fight in The Avengers or Block's being incredibly creative in many of his battles. So how do they also do this with Wildmutt? The short answer is barely, but the long answer will address the most notable flaw Wildmutt has, that essentially solidified the fact that he would be a middle ground alien. The first time we see Omniverse Wildmutt is worth jack shit, but I do like to go over the first appearances. So with that said, the episode that Wildmutt first appears in is in Have I Got a Deal for You, where Pax rides him to look for the Screechet. And that's really it. His next appearance is much better, which is in the episode of Predators and Prey Part 1. In this episode, Wildmutt is used twice. The first time he fights the bug lizard briefly, and the second time he's used has him listening to dog whistles to find out which one sounds like Kyber's, which he does because he heard Kyber's whistle during his fight with Bug Lizard. I think using Wildmutt as a way to help Ben get closer to figuring out how Kyber's whole deal is really clever, especially given the comparisons Wildmutt can have to Zed. And Wildmutt's enhanced hearing is something we normally don't see in the show unless it's via weakness, which does sort of happen here, but in this episode's case it did benefit Ben in the long run. Another episode I like for Wildmutt is Return to Forever, which is also an episode I praise in my favorite moment for every Alien video. It's way too brief, but I love seeing Wildmutt's combat combined with acrobatics. In Then There Were None and Then There Was Ben, Wildmutt is used by Prime Ben and No Watch Ben respectively. Prime Ben briefly has a fight with Eon, which I like for the sole reason that it might be a potential nod to Race Against Time. No Watch Ben uses Wildmutt to trip up Gwen's Accelerate, further adding to how great Wildmutt's reflexes are, doubly so when you consider Accelerate's speed and Wildmutt's limited vision. The last appearance I want to bring up for now is Fight at the Museum, his final proper appearance in Omniverse. In this episode, he's used to track down and fight Subdora. Considering Wildmutt in his ultimate Best of the Prisoner and Ultimate Alien, I like how this emphasizes how Wildmutt is a fantastic if not perfect counter to a Merlini Sapien. Despite there being more appearances than Ultimate Alien, Wildmutt's utilization for the most part from what I've mentioned seems kind of bare minimum. You may be thinking that the main issue with Wildmutt's screen time is the duration. That's actually only a small portion of it. Even though I waited till after going over Omniverse Wildmutt's screen time to bring up this problem, it should be noted that Wildmutt's most notable flaw can be clearly seen as far back as his first few appearances in Classic. So let's get into why. So something you may recall is that I only had one or two things to say about a majority of Classic Wildmutt's episodes. It's not only due to the fact that a good chunk of his appearances are small moments of no real substance, but also because within his first two appearances of the entire show, you kind of already see all that Wildmutt has to offer. His sense of smell, hearing, mobility, and strength are all showcased, and the rest of his appearances for the most part don't really take advantage of these abilities in interesting ways. I said earlier that there were two classic aliens you can compare to Wildmutt that makes this flaw apparent. There's actually three which I'll go over, but the two major aliens to compare to Wildmutt is Diamond Head and Accelerate. Diamond Head is one of the most creative aliens Ben has when it comes to his screen time. You can simplify him to just shooting and creating crystals, but look at all the ways he utilizes this simple power. Throughout all of the 4 series, his powers never felt stale or peaked because he was always doing new things. Creating pillars, shields, battering rams, giant limbs, surfing diamonds, the list goes on. By comparison, you can refer to Wildmutt as a one-trick pony. But even one-trick ponies can make that one trick feel like several. Accelerate is defined by one power, super speed. But early on, he does some really creative stuff like running on water or creating vortexes, and other episodes do some neat stuff with his speed like disarming a bomb or cheating at baseball, comical nature notwithstanding. Compare those two aliens to Wildmutt and it's a clear winner on who the fandom's gonna generally tend to gravitate towards. The scenes of aliens like Diamond Head and Accelerate will stay in your mind for how unique many moments feel, but for Wildmutt it's all too samey. I praised Secret of the Omnitrix for using his sense of smell in a way we didn't see much of for the time of release, but Omniverse kind of overcorrected this issue. Wildmutt in Omniverse tends to just appear for a moment to sniff something and then dips. This includes episodes like Ben Again, No Honor Among Bros, and Something Zombozo Comes This Way. Some of his Omniverse scenes are also just 1-second cameos, like Store 23 or Malfactor. And the episodes that I mentioned for him sniffing shit also only last like 15 seconds, so they may as well be cameos too. I know you shouldn't linger on these type of scenes for too long, but come on, give Wildmutt something to work with. The third alien I want to mention is an alien that's often compared to Wildmutt, specifically in the Classic series. The alien I'm referring to is Blitzwolfer. Now, Blitzwolfer's screen time is not much better. In fact, it's mostly nothing burgers. But the reason they get compared to each other, besides being both dog-like, is that Blitzwolfer is just a better Wildmutt. Both aliens have enhanced hearing, sense of smell, claws, you get the idea. They have similar weaknesses, but Blitzwolfer also offers his sonic howls, so some people like to think that Blitzwolfer only appeared once in Classic because otherwise it would make Wildmutt obsolete. So at least on paper you can also consider an issue of Wildmutt's is that he's outclassed. Not that it matters much in this case since Blitzwolfer barely appeared, and Wildmutt's utilization never got more interesting past Classic for the most part. In fact, you can kind of see this with his transformation sequences, with each one perfectly representing how he's portrayed in each series. Classic's transformation sequence is easily my favorite, not only of the 3 Wildmutt sequences, but of the original 10 as a whole. The muscles going up the arm shot is something he shares with Forms and Accelerate, which of course looks awesome for Wildmutt as well. I love seeing Ben become Wildmutt in real time with this rotating shot, especially with how iconic this frame is in particular. Using Wildmutt's mouth to smoothly go from human to Vulpamaster is such a clever transition, and one of my favorite parts is the emphasis on his claws. Every time the sequence appears in Classic, the sound effect for his claws are different, and the one used specifically in Permanent Retirement is my absolute favorite. I genuinely think about how awesome it is like once every 2 weeks. It's small, I know, but I don't care, it's sick as fuck. The slam into the final shot of Wildmutt roaring is also iconic, and looks great. The classic series transformation sequence easily has the most effort put into it, which is a given since it's the original, which is not to imply that UAF or Omniverse didn't have effort as well, just that classic had the most. UAF's version starts out a bit wonky, just like UAF Wildmutt screen time. The arm shot is now this orange Play-Doh looking texture that looks pretty cheap, but once we get to the actual transformation, it's fine. The iconic frame doesn't have the same oomph due to the look of UAF's transformation sequences, but I see this more as seeing something good but in a different art style than an outright butchering, though the lack of claws is a shame. Speaking of, the rotating shot just sort of flies by, and doesn't have that emphasis on the claws like before, sort of like how UAF Wildmutt just flies by in Ultimate Alien. The frames and green lighting is pretty cool, but you can't really appreciate it unless you go frame by frame like I did. The worst of the three sequences though, might have to go to Omniverse, at least when in full motion. The arm shot is better than UAF's, but while the art of the rotation portion is really good, the face being completely orange rather than showing the eyes for that extra detail of Ben becoming a Vulpamancer is a bit unfortunate. We once again don't get the claw shot, and while he does slam the ground and roars, at the risk of nitpicking, it happens so fast. It kinda makes it feel like a damn here reference. Kind of like how most of Omniverse Wildmutt feels like a damn here. Damn here, he smelled something for a second. Like damn. On the subject of comparison, if you're curious on how I feel about each iterations of Wildmutt's vision, I favor the classic one, though I think UAF and Omniverse does have their own charms to it as well. I low-key want to do a poll for this after the video's posted just because it seems like such a small thing to talk about, but also really funny. It's unfortunate that Omniverse Wildmutt got the short end of the stick, since other classic aliens like Ghost Freak, Ditto, Arctiguana, or Snarrow, the best alien of all time by the way, managed to have creative or fun uses when they appeared. The most interesting thing about Omniverse Wildmutt to me doesn't even come from the show, but in actuality another form of Ben 10 media, which perfectly segues into the final thing I want to talk about for Wildmutt, which is his appearances in Ben 10 merchandise, which I believe made more of an attempt to make Wildmutt more interesting and versatile. Whether or not it worked, however, is another story. We're going to start off Wildmutt's appearances in other Ben 10 media with the video games, as it has the most standard Wildmutt stuff. Wildmutt's first appearance in a video game is Ben 10 Hyperscan. I like that he has the ability to climb walls like Knuckles, but besides that he just has the basic claw swipes. I do love the artwork for his cards though, especially this close-up shot of his sharp teeth. This one here also kinda reminds me of the artwork for Kamikaze from Dragon Quest. Wildmutt's only appearance in a proper video game is in Omniverse 1, and the DS version of Omniverse 2. In the console version, he can find hidden trails with his sense of smell to solve puzzles, which is fine, it's a neat way to incorporate his powers and everything, but in the DS version of Omniverse 2, he seems standard with his bites and scratches for attacks and stuff, but his 1-2 claw swipe is an infinite, meaning you can get a 500 hit combo, which is my favorite thing about Omniverse Wildmutt for how hilarious it is. Wildmutt isn't present in the UAF games, but we do get to see his home planet, Vulpin. Vulpin looks different between Vilgax Attacks and Galactic Racing, as Vilgax Attacks feels like a nuclear power plant, while Galactic Racing feels like a junkyard. I could go either way, but I do slightly prefer Vilgax Attacks' version. Vilgax Attacks also has this random two-headed snake mini-boss, and I got nothing really to say about it, I just really like this mini-boss because it's a snake. The junkyard aesthetic is in reference to how Vulpin would become a poisoned environment, as garbage would be dumped on the planet constantly over the years. As a result, Vulpamancers live beneath the surface in darkness, evolving to not need eyes and relying on their sense of smell to see. I appreciate this lore for the dedication to explain Wildmutt's biology. Also, what the fuck is a Vulpin yak? Wildmutt's most current game appearance, if you can believe it, is Fortnite, which is something I never thought I would say in 2026. Check out my gamer girl goddess diva with the Vulpamancer Jordans. Now go tell him to nerf fuck. I also want to point out that the hologram Ben has for Wildmutt when turning in the Heat Blast is his UAF design, which is expected since it's UAF Ben, but they use classic Stinkfly, so it's a bit inconsistent. But also UAF Wildmutt is technically in 2026 Ben 10 media. Again, I never thought I would say this in the year of 2026. As we move on to the Flash games and books Wildmutt has appeared in, things get a tad more interesting. Although this doesn't really apply to Savage Pursuit, where he can be used to detect landmines. He's kind of pointless if you know where the landmines are beforehand, and you could also rush through a cannonball and take the damage. But I guess it's nice that he's there to show support like a benched Fire Emblem unit. Ben to the Rescue doesn't do anything interestingly new with Wildmutt, but it is a great time for him. His level is the one dedicated to platforming. I like that he can wall jump, and he has my favorite level of the 4 aliens. A full-on game of just Wildmutt with more fleshed out mechanics and level design would be really fun, and I like how some models are ripped from permanent retirement. The most interesting game appearance in my opinion goes to Ben 10 Battle Ready, so you would probably expect Wildmutt's main method of attacking to be scratching or biting, but instead he rolls into a ball in a similar manner to Sonic Spin Dash, something he doesn't do in the show. Some Ben 10 media would give Wildmutt non-canon powers like the Spin Dash, as well as his quills being projectiles, both which are seen in the Ben 10 book I covered back in my video all about them. Barbershop Blues. The projectile quills are technically canon, but in the show proper, Wildmutt's not able to do them until he's an adult. I actually prefer him not to have the quills, as it makes moments of him using his sense of smell to counterattack less interesting. Giving him a ranged option at all times would make it feel less impressive, so maybe they backed out on this power somewhat for having a similar mentality. Or they just forgot. Would you put it past them? Also, on the subject of Wildmutt appearances in Ben 10 books, I love how someone's just torturing him in a sound booth. What do you think they possibly have him listening to? As for the spin dash, I love the idea behind it because I'm a huge Sonic fan, but the main reason I think it was never added to the show proper, assuming that was the intent after Battle Ready, is due to Cannon Bolt. Making an alien obsolete before their own debut, especially your first additional alien, wouldn't be a smart move. There's one more non-canon power to talk about. His card from the UAF era mentions that he can tell how old someone is by smelling them. I don't even know what to say. That shit just sounds like it was made up on the spot. Wildmutt was a scrapped alien for Ben 10 game creator. I'm sure if he wasn't scrapped, he would probably use the spin dash from Battle Ready. And since there's no badge on his chest and no orange lips, thank God, I'm to assume that this is his classic design. So his non-canon stuff doesn't really help. But what about his toys? Wildmutt's merchandise actually has some really cool stuff to talk about. His 4-inch figure is pretty standard, but his DNA alien hero figure comes with a Vilgax drone and drool, replicating his debut. Referencing the show directly is something I wish more of the figures did, so props to Wildmutt for doing so. His Metamorph figure has some of my favorite articulation of any Ben 10 figure, and can be used as a guard dog. Imagine someone's breaking into your home and it's like, oh yeah, time to steal some valuables and huh? Wildmutt noises. Oh, okay. And they just walk away. Compared to other Metamorph figures and their creative ways of incorporating powers, like Heat Blast being a flashlight or Blitzwolfer as a megaphone, this one is a bit on the lesser side when it comes to the extra purpose. And while it's not anything specific for Wildmutt, he has an alien rock paired with Diamond Head. I forgot if I mentioned this when I talked about Diamond Head in one of my previous videos, but I have tons of sentimental value for these alien rocks as it was the first piece of Ben 10 merchandise I ever owned as a kid. Also, Wildmutt has a vehicle like many other aliens did, and his is a fucking bulldozer, and it's awesome looking. Wildmutt's other Ben 10 media overall has some interesting stuff, and you can tell they tried, especially with some of his non-canon powers. But would these powers help Wildmutt not be considered mid as a whole? Honestly, maybe a little, but like, I'm talking about a 2% difference here. These powers, like Wildmutt's main abilities in the show, can only feel fresh for so long, and I doubt Wildmutt will be pulling off homing attacks or drop dashes anytime soon. The coolest thing about Wildmutt doesn't go past his concept. His lack of traditional vision and communication alone is very creative, but since his scenes don't take advantage, he's no different than many other aliens that have such creative potential, but is either severely underutilized, or barely appears in the show at all, period. And just to clarify, this doesn't mean Wildmutt is complete trash. He just suffers from tunnel vision, and his sense of smell alone cannot get him out of that. With Wildmutt out of the way, let's now get to the second alien for this video, Stinkfly, a Lepidopteran from Lepidoptera, who first appears in the episode Washington, BC. Stinkfly's design is one I appreciate heavily, as it's very easy to make a giant bug and call it a day, but there's some details that help this design feel very alien, most notably his eyes. I love how his Omnitrix badge placement is on his face, so subconsciously you may see the badge as his eye whenever he's on screen, making the eye stalks feel even more alien as the badge pops out more. The shape of his wings are very unique for bug design standards, and I love how sharp they are at the ends. The line patterns is also really cool, almost giving off a butterfly shape, with a dragonfly spin on it. The shield-shaped tail is also a really nice detail. I love his proportions as he's essentially this long stick bug with limbs sticking out. I think the black and white arrow pattern suit looks really good with his design, and I also love how his teeth look like the battlements of a castle, which before you ask, yes, I did need to Google for the proper name. The shade of olive green he has also really fits given his name, Stinkfly because he smells like a Donkey Kong mane. Stinkfly is voiced by D. Bradley Baker, using a somewhat higher voice which I think fits his design perfectly.
Hey, I'm just happy to finally get a little backup. Oh, great. Now I look like an alien dweeb. Who you calling butt ugly, butt ugly?
Oh, you reek!
I know.
Stinkfly's eye stalks aren't just to look cool, as they can shoot out slimy goo in the form of projectiles. Stinkfly can also produce this slime in a vomit-like fashion. This slime can be used to have someone or something be stuck. The slime can serve other purposes such as blinding someone or putting out fires. Selectively, but we'll get there. The eye stalks can also move around, giving Stinkfly the ability to see behind him, another aspect of Stinkfly that makes him feel more alien. And while obvious, yes, I am obligated to mention that he can fly. Stinkfly may not look it, but he can be pretty strong physically, and his tail is sharp enough to cut metal with ease. Stinkfly can also produce a toxic gas, although this only has been seen when he's at the age of 4. Stinkfly sounds great and his power set is pretty interesting, so what exactly makes him overlooked in the fandom? You may already know why, but if not, the reasons will grow more apparent as we go over Stinkfly's screen time, which starts with his first appearance in Washington, BC. In Washington, BC, Stinkfly is used to save Gwen from falling off the Washington Monument, and eventually defeats Dr. Animo. The very first thing we see is Stinkfly's transformation sequence. The shot of Ben's face as the eye stalks protrude out is easily the most iconic moment. It's only for a frame or two, but you can see slime as the eye stalks appear, which makes me wish that the slime was a bit more emphasized in this transformation sequence. I also love the implication that Ben's eyes are vacant holes as Stinkfly's eyes blink. We then get this awesome shot of Ben's back as Stinkfly's wings and legs rip out of his shirt, transitioning perfectly into Stinkfly's own uniform. Love the bluish tint as well. Finally, we get the badge up close with an epic shine, followed by Stinkfly's final pose. A pretty neat transformation sequence that sadly only appears twice in Season 1, and then never again if you can believe it. Which, like Wildmutt sequences, has potential to be compared to Stinkfly's utilization as a whole. But once again, I'm getting ahead of myself. Washington, BC utilizes Stinkfly in a way that feels fine enough. This episode gives us a good showcase of flight, slime, and even some physical strength just enough to where you can see the potential in this alien, and where you would want to see more of him. Thankfully, his next appearance is in the episode right after, being the Kraken, which is one of my favorite moments for Stinkfly. Stinkfly spits slime at a tree branch in a similar manner to a grappling hook, which is a nice moment that highlights Ben's quick thinking and creativity. We also see him use this vomit variation of his slime and secrets to stop a Vilgax drone, and the big tick to fight off Tick's worshippers. I just like whenever Stinkfly does this because it's one of my favorite things he can do, even if it is pretty simple. You also see Stinkfly do this outside of combat, like in Superhero Alien Buddy Adventures and Back with a Vengeance. Oh my god, this combined with Wildmutt's spit in the face, if I was Gwen, I'd be fucking fuming. Regardless of where the slime comes from, the main method of Stinkfly slime is entrapment, and it should be noted that this slime is strong enough to keep a helicopter in place or stop a helicopter's propeller blades from spinning, which we see in episodes like Tough Luck and Ben 10 vs. the Negative 10 Part 2. Another purpose the slime has is to put out fires, which we see in episodes like Tourist Trap, where Stinkfly saves a trucker who's trapped, and in the episode A Change of Face when Charmcaster attacks Salem, Massachusetts. This does make Stinkfly handy in a situation involving fire if Heat Blast isn't in use, but it comes with one inconsistency. In the episode Grudge Match, we see Stinkfly's goo be used alongside Heat Blast's fire to combust. So why didn't the fire go out? I was originally going to argue that maybe Stinkfly's slime has different properties when you use his eye stalks or his mouth, but Kevin himself uses his mouth, so that wouldn't really apply here. My only argument I can kind of think of is that maybe Heat Blast's fire is different from regular fire, maybe? Or I could just stop hurting my brain as this was clearly a writing mishap. Also, I have no idea where to put this, but since I just talked about Tourist Trap, I'll just mention it now. I love when Ben makes funny faces at a kid at the beginning of the episode and uses Stinkfly to scare him. It seems like something some 10-year-olds might do with the Omnitrix, and I know this kid's therapist is making bank. Some Stinkfly scenes that focus on his flight more than anything else can be really fun, like the episode Kevin 11, where Stinkfly flies away from the police while carrying Kevin soaring throughout Manhattan. I love this part especially where Kevin walks along the Statue of Liberty. I'm also very dumb because it took me 20 years to realize that the moment where Stinkfly and Kevin are in front of the bus is a joke about bugs on a windshield. Yeah, I'm kind of slow. I love the detail that this live broadcast is capturing Stinkfly and it gets carried over into the giant screen that we see behind them. And all of this is happening while the police is on their tail trying to gun them down, which is all over a video game, by the way. Like, what game could you guys have been possibly trying to— Holy shit, is that the Battle of 1999 Castlevania game? Okay, hand me a crowbar. Another scene I love for Stinkfly is the return. We get some neat use of Stinkfly's flight to stop some escaped prisoners, especially when he flies around to use their own chain against them, and the animation overall is pretty rad. There are 2 episodes that give us very unusual uses of Stinkfly. Don't Drink the Water and Ben 10,000. Like Wildmutt, it's mostly for the designs. 4-year-old Stinkfly is pudgier and also kind of bumpy alongside his back, which could be replicating a larva compared to a grown bug. Ben 10,000's design might be my favorite of the classic aliens we see for him, besides Snarrow of course, but Snarrow is also a recolor, so objectively my favorite has to probably go to Stinkfly. I like the inverse color for his tail, which is larger, and the bigger front legs, while a minor touch, is one that does enough to help this design feel like an evolution of Stinkfly. To go back to Don't Drink the Water for a second, this scene shows off Stinkfly using toxic gas to kill some plants, which I'm assuming only 4-year-old Stinkfly can do. But if that's not the case, I'm surprised his power never comes back, as it seems very useful. Overall, Stinkfly had a pretty good time in Classic. He's got some good utilization and fun scenes that at times can feel somewhat dynamic. So what exactly gave him the mid status that he's tend to be regarded with? There's 2 reasons that contribute to Stinkfly's status, and both of those reasons aren't necessarily his fault. And one of those reasons will become very apparent as I go over both UAF and Omniverse Stinkfly, or lack thereof. UAF Stinkfly's design is pretty much the same as the classic design, just with less detail due to the art style change. A shame for Stinkfly especially, as the shines he had in classic helps highlight how much this alien smells. When you look at him in classic, you can tell he probably has some really smelly oily shit on his skin, but UAF's version is very simplistic, which doesn't mean it's bad, just that it's a downgrade, which also applies to the badge placement, but that one is a given because of the consistency of badge placements of all the aliens in UAF. We also get to see 10-year-old Stinkfly in UAF as well, which is essentially the same as Teen Ben, but with a better badge placement. And Stinkfly is once again voiced by D. Bradley Baker. So things aren't looking too bad, but what about UAF Stinkfly's screen time? If you thought Wildmutt's screen time in UAF was bad, Stinkfly only gets 1 episode in the entire show, which is the episode Forge of Creation. Teen Ben turns young Ben into Stinkfly to fight off Ultimate Agrigore. Look, I get the writers are allergic to Halloween aliens or additionals outside of Cannonbolt, Wildvine, and the occasional Upchuck or Ditto, but I think Blitzwolfer, Eye Guy, or Frankenstrike would have been much better calls here. Not only that, but when Stinkfly attacks Ultimate Agrigore, it's with lasers? Blue lasers? I don't need to explain why this sucks, right? Like, the footage speaks for itself. Ultimate Agrigore whoops Stinkfly with a single blast of wind, and that's it. No more UAF Stinkfly. Yeah, this portion of Stinkfly's career is barely worth going over, but I had to talk about it briefly for how disappointing it is. We could have had at least a scene or 2 of Teen Stinkfly doing something, anything honestly. I'd even take just flying around for a bit to search for something, but instead we get a scene that isn't faithful to Stinkfly's slime and is over before we know it. So Ultimate Alien does nothing to help Stinkfly's case. But will the same be said for Omniverse? Well, let's find out as I go over the true return of Stinkfly after the classic series, starting of course with his Omniverse design. So Omniverse Stinkfly's design is very interesting to me. When I compare it to classics, I do like the more bug-like approach with his proportions, where his gut is a bit bigger, and I think the black and green suit fits Stinkfly pretty well, although there is a few things I'm not a fan of, the hippo teeth and exposed chin being 2 of them. My least favorite aspect of Omniverse's design is gonna probably come off as nitpicky, but it's the pupils. Something I didn't mention for some of Stinkfly's designs is that they have pupils. I know a good chunk of people prefer Stinkfly with pupils, as it makes it much easier to notice his eyes, but I think it takes away from the alien charm. And even if I did prefer the pupils, it's hard to not notice the inconsistency of a 4-year-old and adult Lepidopteran having pupils, but for some reason not the 10 or 16-year-old one. On the topic of ages, 11-year-old Stinkfly in Omniverse is identical to Teen Stinkfly, but with a black and white outfit instead, which I do slightly prefer. If some of the aspects of Omniverse Stinkfly were altered a bit, this could have potentially won me over as my favorite design. For the 3rd time in a row, Stinkfly is voiced by D. Bradley Baker, although I swear there's something different with Omniverse's version of Stinkfly's voice compared to classic. I don't know if it's like a filter or something, but maybe you guys can let me know. Maybe I'm just hearing things.
You may go what's so annoying. Stinkfly! That doesn't even sound like Humongousaur. Could have been worse. And at least you're not Stinkfly's predator. Have a nice trip. See you next fall.
Omniverse has a design for Stinkfly that's overall pretty solid, and there's 2 versions of it to boot. So let's see how much appearances Stinkfly gets in Omniverse compared to Ultimate. Oh my god, you cannot be serious. Yeah, let's just get the first of the 2 issues out of the way. Like Ultimate Alien, Stinkfly's runtime throughout Omniverse duration-wise is abysmal. 4 episodes, not counting a use from Ben 23 or his cameo in A New Dawn. That is it. It's better than aliens like Brainstorm, Lodestar, or Ripjaws, but that bar is the lowest of lows, so does that really mean anything? So we have a couple of episodes. Let's see if Stinkfly can deliver despite the putrid amount of episodes to talk about. Stinkfly's return in the Omniverse is in the opening of A Jolt from the Past. In this episode, he attacks a megawatt before getting splashed with a smoothie. It's short, but this is only episode 3. In Of Predators and Prey Part 1, Stinkfly manages to stop Crabdozer in her tracks, forcing her to become Bug Lizard, who effortlessly defeats Stinkfly as Bug bug lizard is Stinkfly's natural predator, which is also a short scene. In part 2, Stinkfly flies around and gets tricked into being caught. I'm sensing a pattern here. Okay, to give credit to part 2, 11-year-old Ben uses Stinkfly to mess with Gwen and briefly fights Tarantula, but he does get bodied pretty easily. On the bright side, we do get to see a little bit of Stinkfly's homeworld. We don't get to see too much of the planet, but I do like the colors in the beehive aesthetic. Then there's Malfactor. Like Wildmutt, Stinkfly appears and is dunked in a pool. And that's it. That is the last time that Ben Prime uses Stinkfly. Not even a fourth in of the entire show, by the way. That is a very horrendous oversight if they wanted a more diverse alien pool for the entirety of Omniverse. And as I mentioned before, far from the only one. Ben 23 uses Stinkfly, and then there was Ben to fight off Eon with his version of the alien dubbed Big Bug. I think the blues look really nice and oh my god. Look, I'm sorry. I try my hardest not to call characters a bum for having some L's, but Eon, you have time manipulation. That is just some slime. Eon, you are a bum. And don't think cool enemies are flying under the radar either. Zed girl, you needed to become Bug Lizard to get out of his slime? As Crabdozer? Really? Before anyone asks, no, I do not count Skurd's uses. I don't care if it's technically Stinkfly's wings. That feels like cheating and isn't worth talking about besides what I just said. Omniverse Stinkfly is an upgrade from Ultimate Alien by technicality. The design has more effort and he has more scenes and does something, but that term is used very loosely. This is where that transformation sequence comparison comes into play. You know how they showed a transformation sequence twice in Classic during Season 1 and then never again? That may as well be Stinkfly after Classic. One scene in UAF and bare minimum crumbs in Omniverse, if you can even call it that. Stinkfly's duration alone isn't why he has mid status, though it does contribute to it. Before I get to the main issue of the two, let's see if we can salvage more appreciation for Stinkfly with his appearances and merch in video games. Like Wildmutt, Stinkfly has a 4-inch figure and DNA Alien Hero figure. This one allows you to shoot goo out of his eyes like the show. A neat concept, but sadly the most interesting thing when it comes to his figures. He has miscellaneous stuff as you would expect, but no figure going into Omniverse, which was also the case for Wildmutt. However, Stinkfly does have an unreleased Hyper Alien figure with his 11-year-old design. Not a fan of the texture they use for the black part of his suit, although the legs being more mantis-like is really cool. I also discovered this very recently, but there's a Stinkfly suit for Ben 10 Live, which played in a water park in Thailand, and the suit looks pretty damn good. You wouldn't expect Stinkfly to have a suit that translates well, but I stand corrected. In terms of games, Stinkfly, like Wildmutt, appears in Battle Ready, where he can shoot slime and fly over bottomless pits. Stinkfly also appears alongside Ripjaws in Power Splash, shooting goo at Jonah Melville and his men like in the Kraken. Stinkfly also gets time to shine in Blockade Blitz. I always forget to talk about this game despite doing some videos on aliens that appear in this game, but it's actually one of my favorite Ben 10 Flash games. It's essentially an Arkanoid clone with Ben 10 flavor added to it. Stinkfly has a projectile that's really good at destroying blocks, but his wingspan means you couldn't go to the edge of the screen, which could be a potential detriment. Omniverse-wise, Stinkfly appears in Ben 10 Omniverse Alien Run, or at least I think he does. I couldn't find any footage of him in use, and every video on YouTube has forums everywhere, just like the show! Stinkfly also appears in Chronolopolis alongside Forums and Ripjaws. His appearance in the game isn't really that interesting, but at least they remember that Omniverse Stinkfly exists. He also appears in Ben 10 Slammers with really nice art, until you notice the badge error. I don't even know how you make that mistake. Video game wise, the only time we get Stinkfly is in Hyperscan. He can fly as you would expect. What the fuck? Oh my god. Jeez, Gwen, I'm sorry. I'll find your pages later. Jeez. Anyway, Stinkfly can fly, but he— Ugh! Okay, you guys gotta stop doing that. Stinkfly doesn't shoot any slime, but just punches enemies with his fist. I mean, you gotta respect him for putting up hands, right? His card artwork has some really awesome shots and is very grotesque. This artwork just screams Stinkfly. These cards do a better job representing Stinkfly than both UAF and Omniverse. I'm partially serious. As I mentioned before, Stinkfly appears in Fortnite, but only via hologram. And even before Fortnite, Stinkfly made an appearance a year prior in Crisis on Infinite Mirths, an episode of Jellystone. I've seen complaints of this looking very cheap to some, but you guys don't understand. It's pretty clear that he's referencing Hyperscan. Also, brief tangent. Does anyone else find the artwork of Stinkfly from the CN website back in 2006 a little confusing? It's a really cool pose, but like, this torso does not look like how Stinkfly's looks like in the show. I don't know, it always just kinda bugs me. I promise that was not intentional, but I'm very happy I made that pun. But anyways, even with UAF and Omniverse's iteration of Stinkfly in mind, Stinkfly is an alien that seems like they would bring a lot of joy to the viewer. But you know what they say. Comparison is the robbery of joy. Similar to the outclassing point I had way back in my Ripjaws video, in a vacuum, Stinkfly is a very useful alien, with a lot of good use cases. But once you bring the other flyers of Ben's roster into the mix, Stinkfly looks pretty weak in comparison. When you think of the aliens known for being flyers, you may think of Big Chill, Astrodactyl, or Jetray, and of course Ghost Freak for being part of the original 10. Some may even put Chromastone into that group, or even aliens that have levitated like Brainstorm. For the sake of simplicity, I'll just go over the first 3 aliens I listed. Big Chill doesn't have goo or a strong tail, but he does have cryokinesis, which can be way more useful than slime. Not just for freezing people, but to save people in efficient ways as seen in episodes like Plumber's Helpers. We have seen Stinkfly's goo save people, but with a lot more struggle. While this is a super niche use case, Stinkfly slime, as we've seen, can also blind people temporarily, and considering a lot of Ben's enemies can break through Big Chill's ice, maybe blinding them is better in certain situations. I say this as if this is something that Stinkfly does commonly, but I am referring to hypotheticals to be fair. Big Chill can go intangible, and that's never not going to be useful. To give Stinkfly any benefit of the doubt, his card from the UAF era does mention that his skin is bulletproof, and we've seen Big Chill be taken down pretty easily if he fails to go intangible, although this isn't something that happens terribly often. Astrodactyl has laser whips and Stardust rings, which can be seen as more powerful in comparison to Stinkfly slime. Astrodactyl has been shown to also be able to throw hands, and he has pretty efficient acrobatics as well. Astrodactyl's powers are also, explosive, so while Stinkfly can trap people and stuff, Astrodactyl outright damages and destroys things with more ease. Stinkfly doesn't really do that unless his tail is involved. Now for these 2 aliens, I can potentially see arguments of them being interchangeable with Stinkfly for different reasons. However, there is 2 things to note. One is that on paper, Big Chill and Astrodactyl seem more useful than Stinkfly by a good degree, which can certainly affect his status. But one element of Astrodactyl that he shares with Jetray pretty much solidified the mid status, and that one element is speed. Stinkfly at times has been shown to struggle to fly to a location before Ben timed out, such as the Kraken or the Ultimate Weapon. And in tough luck, if not for Gwen, this man would be a red paste. Now, some of you might be saying, what about Merry Christmas? Stinkfly flew around the entire world in one night. But in actuality, Grandpa Max and Gwen were operating a dial on the sled that allowed them to fast travel. Think like Zoom from Dragon Quest. So no, Stinkfly didn't use speed alone for this episode. Also random, but why is Stinkfly so jittery here? He's acting like me whenever Saika Katahara's on screen. And let me tell you, I would compete in the Kengan Annihilation just for her hand in marriage. Like wowie wowie wow wowie, hi gorgeous. To briefly give credit to Stinkfly flying, I find a few of these moments very charming for how cute they are. I'll always appreciate the evolution of Gwen being in discomfort whenever flying with Stinkfly in most of the first 2 seasons, and then eventually having fun with Stinkfly like in episodes like Camp Fear. And their hug and Back with a Vengeance always warms my heart. I also love there's a parallel of the UAF trio as a whole, as we see both Gwen and Kevin have fun with Stinkfly at some point. To get back on track, Stinkfly's speed just doesn't hold a candle to Astrodactyl or Jetray, but Jetray's got even more to offer because speed-wise he's Ben's fastest flyer, which isn't just shown in normal battle, but also with the capability of traveling into hyperspace as seen in Eye of the Beholder, making that point about Stinkfly flying at over 60 miles per hour kind of lacking, especially since it's only for short distances. Like Astrodactyl, his Neuroshock lasers can do some serious damage, but there's also one use case that people sometimes forget about Jetray, the fact that he can swim. Now this matters for all 3 aliens, but especially for Jetray. These 3 aliens can either swim or touch water. Yeah, I bet you guys thought I forgot to talk about this, huh? Stinkfly's most notable weakness is water. If his wings get wet, he cannot fly, and in They Lurk Below, we see that Stinkfly is not able to swim, even though he did this in the Kraken. An inconsistency? In Ben 10? Never. Jetray has better damage output, more durability, speed, swimming, he's got it all covered. Now let's say you want Stinkfly's goo alone to be a valid reason to prefer Stinkfly from a capability perspective. Ball Weevil's goo can trap people more efficiently, and is very explosive, thus being more damaging. And then there's Goop, who can melt stuff with acidic slime, has body altering that makes him very agile and versatile, and he's one of Ben's most durable aliens when you really think about it. I'm only mentioning these aliens for the sake of covering all of Stinkfly's use cases, which even then, Jetray still covers the most, slime or not. Even without Jetray in mind, you got Big Chill and Astrodactyl, who I mentioned before. If you put Stinkfly in the ring with these 3 aliens, he wouldn't stand a chance, both in battle and in the fandom. I think by now, you understand why I consider Wildmutt and Stinkfly the middle ground of the original 10. Both of them are perfectly fine aliens on their own, but due to issues such as being outclassed by other aliens with more versatility, not being able to do more than what's told to us the moment we meet them, a lack of scenes capitalizing on what they can do, or in Stinkfly's case being borderline forgotten entirely, these 2 aliens fall short compared to not just the most popular of aliens, but a pretty hefty chunk of the Omnitrix arsenal as a whole. You heard my thoughts, but as always, I want to know what you think. What do you think of Wildmutt and Stinkfly? Do you also find them to be mediocre? Do you actually love and or favorite them? Or do you think they just outright suck? And also, do you think Wildmutt and Stinkfly are the perfect candidates for the middle ground of the original 10? I can't imagine any other alien fitting the middle ground better than these two. Now, some of you might say Ripjaws should fit in this category, but sadly he's not considered mid to many. Most of the time he's just considered outright useless. So at the very least, Wildmutt and Stinkfly don't have that reputation. I appreciate you guys for stopping by, and as always, happy night hunting.